Story 1. It was false. She did nothing wrong. These reports are always modified after the first report. The date is constantly updated. Donald Trump does not want anyone to point out his failings. Story 2. Mostly defeated. Eagerly awaiting the midterm elections, hoping we can elect better leaders to push back on this regime. Crying because I never imagined Americans could be so hateful or callous. Story 3. Americans are currently forced to live in a political ideology where the truth is completely irrelevant and narrative is all that matters. People grow up believing they are the good guys and that their nation is the good guys. It is difficult to have the truth so fully revealed and then made worse. Story 4. Firing the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief is like killing the messenger. If anyone should be fired, it is the people failing to develop rational economic policies that promote job growth. Now, no one will trust the numbers, but then again, maybe that is Donald Trump's whole strategy. Discredit the government so it is powerless to address a country and economy rigged to make the super rich even richer while the masses fight for scraps and are divided over various social issues. Story 5. My dad was in military intelligence during the Cold War. We were both car enthusiasts. He used to talk about how the Soviet factories never produced the quality or quantity of vehicles that the Soviet government claimed. He said more, but that is what I am thinking about now. Messaging was coordinated, even if reality was not. We are there. Story 6. Thin-skinned Donald Trump responded negatively to the messenger and will now appoint someone who will manipulate the financial records and only release reports that present him in a favorable light. Story 7. Expected response. He wanted them to stop reporting coronavirus numbers and pretend no one was dying. His desire to pretend that job numbers are good falls in line with this. Story 8. I'm tired of this nonsense. It's just like the last time with Mr. Orange Face, but times 10. If I told you that former President Donald Trump signed an order to seize Yellowstone as his own property and named it a federal Trump park, you'd probably believe me. The man is completely unhinged. It's the Gulf of Mexico, and I want my rose garden back. I'm tired of being angry at this person for their ignorance and behavior. Story 9. I cannot imagine what they must be going through. How do you face the day when the most powerful man in the world spins a story of conspiracy against you and is then supported by equally powerful men in the government? The message is amplified by the conservative media and propped up by millions of supporters. I really hope she is doing okay. This administration is just vile. Story 10. That Donald Trump runs a criminal regime. What else? Also, he is desperately attempting to bury the Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein files. Story 11. Looks like corruption, smells like corruption. Draw whatever conclusion you may from that. I know what I call it. Story 12. Foul but unsurprising. All Biden appointees in roles the president can remove and replace should assume it will happen and have something ready if possible, but stay as long as possible for the country's sake. We need as many people on the inside pushing back as possible. Civilian, contractor, whatever, if you are on the inside and have some kind of access, and you love the United States of America, like actually not Donald Trump's kind of love, you should stay put in my opinion, because if you leave, that is a slot to fill. These events are reminders of this. Yes, you are replaceable. Yes, you should put yourself and your family first, but if you are able, God knows the United States needs you. Story 13. I have to be honest, there is a bit of get in line in my emotions because there has been so much truly awful stuff to be outraged and frightened by. A tantrum firing someone for not making him look good with their numbers, by someone who has sincerely said things like, "It will be 1,500% better," is horrifyingly just par for the course. But it is also another block in the tower of fascism our orange toddler seems to be gleefully building, which is not affecting my mental health at all. Story 14. Listen to an interview of a previous basic life support chief today. The chief does not see the numbers until they are ready for reveal. There are many checks in the system, making it nearly impossible to change the numbers by more than 1%. The former president is upset because the numbers do not support his narrative that all is well and everyone gets donuts. Story 15. We can no longer trust our government. Even the routine departments have been compromised. You should not trust them either. Story 16. There is a new negative demonstration of this administration making the world worse practically every day. This is not even in the top 10. Today's news reported that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is ending funding for messenger ribonucleic acid vaccine development because vaccines like the coronavirus disease vaccine do not work on respiratory viruses. If avian influenza finally mutates to replicate in humans within the next 5 years or so, we are in serious trouble. We will also likely continue to see increasing outbreaks of measles and similar diseases. The biggest impact of this is that interest rates will likely stay higher for longer, and buying inflation-adjusted United States government debt, such as Treasury inflation-protected securities or Series I savings bonds, is likely to yield less money than under accurate Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Story 17. I think it is going to deteriorate and undermine the trust in United States government data. Companies and countries around the world rely on United States data as the gold standard. If there is questionable information or data communicated directly from whoever replaces the fired commissioner, the economic and geopolitical impact could be significant. Markets do not respond well to uncertainty. Story 18. Corrupt and unintelligent. How can they make functional decisions if the people presenting the data are fired when the data is unfavorable? Look at China and North Korea to see how that has been working. Story 19. America is not a serious country anymore. It is a corrupt nation run by an individual with serious allegations. It should be addressed as soon as possible. Story 20. Falls right in line with his stop testing for coronavirus and the numbers will drop method of pandemic control. The reality does not matter to him if he can publish fake numbers to make himself look good. It does not matter if it is coronavirus deaths or jobs, or the lack of them. Story 21. Donald Trump behaved poorly. What did the people who voted for him expect? He did not care about the manner in which government functions during his first term. Why would he even remotely care during his second term? Story 22. This is exactly what an authoritarian does. Does not like the information? Suppress the information. We will never have another True Jobs report as long as he remains in office. Every report will show incredible growth while the country burns down, and his supporters will say, he brought back jobs, more than anyone ever. Story 23. It will not be possible to trust any labor statistics for the next 3.5 years. Former President Donald Trump will ensure that they are altered in his favor. Story 24. The United States, slowly but surely, is heading in the direction of becoming an authoritarian state. The fundamental problem is a flawed constitution and a polarized electorate with a large anti-democratic minority, for varied reasons, willing to support the authoritarians. The Bureau of Labor Statistics atrocity is only the latest manifestation of this decadent process. Sorry for us and the world. Story 25. It is his most destructive act thus far. He has destroyed trust in government information. Everything is a lie to protect him from the consequences of his decisions. Story 26. I think Donald Trump was not complicit in the Jeffrey Epstein child trafficking mechanism. He was the architect and founder. He was the ringleader. That is how he has compromised the Republican Party. In fact, he possesses all the blackmail artifacts. Story 27. She would not lie for Donald Trump, so he fired her and installed someone who would. Just like everyone else he has ever replaced. Pretty straightforward. Story 28. Was the chief really manipulating the labor numbers? That is a serious offense. It should be investigated by Congress, should it not? People should be put under oath to explain why they believe there has been such manipulation. Let us get to the bottom of this and obtain honest answers. Conducting this investigation in public would be best. Would it not? Who knows if others are involved? Simply firing the chief may not be enough to ensure accurate numbers in the future. Of course, someone could simply be lying again, as offenders sometimes do. Story 29. What will be the quality of the next chief of the Bureau of Labor Statistics when they know they are one bad jobs report away from being fired? How will we ever trust numbers coming from this administration? Story 30. I will be assuming the government is falsifying records from here on out. I am used to the Republican Party trying to deceive me about what I can see with my own eyes. I will continue to not believe a word that comes out of that dishonest person's mouth. Story 31. It is yet another escalation of authoritarianism. The current regime is clearly off the rails. That is a real shame. What is even worse is that trust in government will be further eroded, no matter who the next leader may be. It is the further deterioration of the United States government and public service. It will be hard for anybody to recover from this in some ways. Story 32. I agree with the reactions that Donald Trump is a snowflake and that the economy is still the economy even if we do not have accurate numbers. However, I think it is far more nefarious than that. I watched a clip where a supporter of the Make America Great Again movement was on the news arguing essentially that Americans do not pay tariffs because inflation has not increased. On one hand, they enact policies that damage the economy, and on the other, they manipulate the numbers so when they are called out for harming the economy, they can simply claim that the numbers do not support those accusations. This is similar to destroying the satellites tracking climate change data. They will harm the planet and then, when questioned about the damage to the climate, say there is no data to support that. Story 33. Same as all the other irrational things happening. Question how that is allowed. If this is real life, just shake your head. Story 34. It is disappointing but expected. A dictator cannot have anyone with any degree of authority disagree with their claims. Story 35. When you tear out a man's tongue, you are not proving him a liar. You are only telling the world you fear what he might say. Or in this case, a woman's tongue. Story 36. You cannot trust numbers, said Donald Trump. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command, wrote George Orwell in his novel 1984. Story 37. Position should be nonpartisan and numbers should be factual. Any attempt to make adjustments in favor of one side or another should result in the position being vacated. Story 38. It is disgusting and reduces trust in what has been a nonpartisan office. Firing someone because you do not like the numbers is wrong and causes other countries to mistrust data or information from this administration. Story 39. Why listen to the experts when you believe you are already the smartest person on the planet? And many people are willing to flatter you to confirm your self-opinion. Story 40. Donald Trump never accepted a fact he liked. The negative ones are labeled as fake news, and the positive ones are never considered positive enough. He is a prime example of entitlement. Story 41. Laugh out loud. Know this, when we collapse, we will do absolutely everything in our power to bring the rest of the world down with us. Story 42. Does anyone remember when, before his first term, Donald Trump angrily ranted that the positive job reports and unemployment rate reported under President Barack Obama were phony or a hoax, that the numbers were fake? Does anyone also remember when, barely 2 months into his first term, his press secretary Sean Spicer, after praising how great the February jobs report was asked if these reports had somehow magically become accurate purely due to Trump being in office, despite the data not varying wildly from earlier reports? He chuckled and said with a smile that Trump said it had. That is exactly what will happen again after a staunch yes man replaces the previous chief. This scenario has already played out. It was transparently false before, and it will continue to be. The clearly obese president who hired a doctor that repeatedly claimed he is in exceptional shape will be just as blatantly dishonest about any positive statistics being the absolute truth, and any negative numbers being promptly replaced with new reports from the new stooge. But, just like that moment roughly 8 years ago, it will come and go and nobody will acknowledge how obvious the lying is. At least not enough of the general public for it to matter. Story 43. We live in a corrupt country where reality is constantly ignored to satisfy a greedy, unethical, and immoral individual. Story 44. My thoughts are the same with almost every headline that prints his name. Somebody just do it already. Story 45. When are the sane members of the Republican Party going to take action? I hate to admit it, but that is what it will take. Be courageous. We know you dislike Donald Trump and everything he stands for. He is damaging this country, and you are aware of it. Our future is in your hands, unfortunately. Story 46. When you do not like the data, fire the person supplying the data. Shooting the messenger is a poor strategy if you never want to hear the truth again. Story 47. To quote Mo from the Simpsons Comet episode, "Let's burn down the observatory so this never happens again." Story 48. Just one more excessive nail in the coffin that was America. It is dead now. The authoritarian forces have won, and there is no going back. The corruption of money into a limited two-party system ensured our demise. These forces are simply taking advantage of a broken system. Too bad. We could have been great. Story 49. You can blame COVID-19 for her numbers being off so much, I guess. COVID-19 cost many people their jobs, including hers. She did not do a good job, as the labor data shows. She was hired by President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and fired by former President Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump likes to fire people, and that is that. Story 50. Same as my thoughts on the rest of this situation. We are rushing through a less optimistic idiocracy timeline. Story 51. Blatant corruption and authoritarianism are at work. However, apparently half the country believes Donald Trump can do no wrong. Story 52. A severely mentally disturbed elderly narcissist who is surrounded by sycophantic individuals and lunatics is running our lives. It is very bad. Story 53. Not surprised at all, honestly. It feels like things like this happen every time the data does not fit the narrative. Story 54. Triple H is a member of a council, and all of the cabinet members are from television. None of it is real anymore. I do not trust anything this administration offers. Story 55. 1. Generalized indignation and concern. Whether from the economic, journalistic, or political camp, we see a threat to the neutrality of institutions. 2. Fear of a collapse of confidence. Without reliable data, markets, businesses, and citizens are disoriented. 3. Call for safeguards. Many are calling for intervention by Congress or independent institutions to prevent further interference. Story 56. Considering she was appointed by President Joseph R. Biden Jr., with whom former President Donald J. Trump has a complicated relationship, I am surprised she has kept her job as long as she did. Story 57. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has officially joined former President Donald Trump's Ministry of Truth. Now we cannot trust anything they say and have to rely on automatic data processing for labor data. Story 58. As long as I get paid my share of the 1,600% reduction or rebate he promised on my prescription drugs, I am willing to suspend belief in regular math and factual statistics. Story 59. Petty nonsense from the thin-skinned president. Now we cannot even trust numbers from a nonpartisan organization because he is going to appoint someone who will only praise him. Story 60. They lie to the American people because 1, they think they are better than us, and 2, they have no fear of us. Pass it on. Story 61. This is a strong move toward the United States of America becoming a more corrupt nation with a lower quality of life. Good countries spend resources on collecting accurate data to make informed decisions. The Trump administration is refusing to make good decisions by restricting people who collect data. Donald Trump promised to behave like the president of a developing nation. He is delivering on that promise. Voters in the United States of America are supporting a shift away from countries like Norway, Germany, Japan, and Australia toward countries such as Thailand, Paraguay, Greece, and Senegal. We do not deserve quality improvements right now, and I am not expecting progress in the United States of America for some time. Story 62. Trump and Make America Great Again can deceive us all they want, but the truth is real and the situation is getting worse out here. Story 63. My weekly oscillation between realizing we are really embracing authoritarianism and recognizing that I am getting upset in exactly the way intended, which is not a big deal, continues. Then, I consider that making me appear alarmist is a tactic used to discredit those of us who remain vigilant. This ensures that when we finally cross a truly alarming red line, one we actually crossed a long time ago, no one believes me. Story 64. It is just Donald Trump acting like an overgrown baby. He did not get what he wanted, so he fired her to get someone who will do what he wants. Story 65. The potential for wrong or misleading data to be released will impact the markets more severely than any tariff so far. It is important not to provide false information. Regardless of the data released, people will remain unemployed, not spending money, and production will stall or shut down. This data must be released so governments and markets can respond appropriately. If the data is misleading due to former President Trump's ego, he will face serious consequences. Story 66. We are close to a large terrorist attack on our soil, where the threat is likely coming from within. Story 67. I think you are about a week late. You are supposed to be upset about the most current dismantling of our democracy. Story 68. It just shows how petty Donald Trump is. I hope the data remains consistent and apolitical. Story 69. The Federal Reserve sets interest rates based on unemployment numbers. Now they will need to rely on flawed data that may cause them to keep interest rates inflated well beyond what they should be, potentially leading to deflation because they are operating without accurate information. Story 70. By doing so, it becomes normalized and will take generations for government institutions to rebuild trust. Unless condemned loudly by commentators on Fox News, Newsmax, One American News Network, and other right-wing media until this action is reversed, nothing produced by this government's agencies will carry any weight or meaning. Anything released can be accused of being falsified for political gain by the right people. Story 71. You are witnessing in real time the decline of the United States as a superpower. That is because 40% of Americans still support this man, and the same 40% would believe the earth is flat if he told them so. The rest of the world needs to transition to a future where they are no longer reliant upon the United States for security and economic stability. Story 72. When this is all said and done, we are going to need our allies, the ones with actual functioning democracies, to come in and help us rebuild our elections, checks and balances, and anti-corruption measures. That is the only way we are going to regain credibility, even with our own people. Story 73. I think it is about 192 on the list of all the horrifying things this sociopathic administration has done in the last 6 months. Story 74. It is corrupt. I have no reason to believe additional information going forward. Just another wonderful day in America. Story 75. We know Donald Trump will manipulate the financial records going forward because he feels compelled to do so. His tariffs and deportation plans will harm the economy. Story 76. It is not good. I am surprised that corporate America accepts it because financial institutions use these reports and need them. Story 77. It seems politically motivated to me. Also, the revisions are significant, and they should not be that extensive. Story 78. Truth is, it had all become political. His figures were, in fact, sketchy or based on some such. But what would I know? Story 79. It is expected from this soulless, aspiring dictator. Prepare yourself. The next 3.5 years are going to be intense. Story 80. We live in an actual idiocracy. The bad statistics are not magically untrue just because you hire a yes man. Story 81. Trump is a sensitive person and tends to overreact. He should be embarrassed, but he is too shallow to understand how everyone views him. He desperately wants to be a tough person, but he always acts like a weakling and a coward. Story 82. It means that for the next 3 years, only a select few will be privileged with factual information. One more way he can monetize the White House. Story 83. Disappointed but not surprised. Still a better hegemon than Moscow or Beijing, both of which engage in this specific kind of behavior regularly. Story 84. They are also instructing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to destroy the satellites used for monitoring climate change. Anything that reveals inconvenient truths for the ruling party is being dismantled. This is basic authoritarianism similar to North Korea. Story 85. Tired and exhausted from all the controversy. I wish I could leave to any other country or just get out of my state, but I am stuck as a low-class laborer. There is not a whole lot I can do except vote, which did not end up mattering because over half of my country could not be bothered. Story 86. From what I saw, they have been estimating incorrectly by large margins and having to make record-breaking large revisions for at least 2 years now. I am not saying Donald Trump will improve it, but it definitely seems like something was going wrong. Story 87. Only a delusional person would dare to think that ignoring reality and creating a false narrative is somehow beneficial to a functioning country. Story 88. It is incredibly disturbing. More importantly, it is problematic economically. It might be just one job, but by firing her, Donald Trump has introduced a tremendous amount of uncertainty into job numbers for the United States. Economists in the United States and abroad rely on those numbers to gauge the health of the United States economy and to make investments. This one firing has introduced an enormous amount of uncertainty into the global economy for no reason other than to boost his ego. Story 89. That dear leader is uninterested in truth and will absolutely shoot the messenger if the truth does not line up with what he wants to hear. Another sign of our crumbling institutions. A fun anecdote. My local grocery had cucumbers for sale at 2 for $4 yesterday. In the middle of summer, when cucumbers grow. That is surely a sign of a healthy economy, regardless of what the numbers made up by experts say. That is about 3 times what they ought to cost, but hey, I am sure the economy is fine. In fact, I bet it is great again. Story 90. Canadian here. I really wish my Southern brothers and sisters would stop expressing defeatist nihilism by repeating would have, could have, should have, and move on to the next song by Rage Against the Machine. Story 91. It shows with each passing day that laws only matter if the people responsible for enforcing them stand up and do so. Almost everything Donald Trump has done since he took office is a clear violation of the laws we have, but it no longer matters. Story 92. Trump fired him to send a message. The message is this: if you report anything that makes Donald Trump look bad, you can kiss your job goodbye. The chiefs of statistics reported poor job numbers, so he was fired. He was not fired because he lied. All he did was report bad numbers. Donald Trump wants his people to report only good news. Any bad news should be covered up or falsified. Story 93. Fascism does not care about the truth. This person just wants people to praise him. I would take technocratic neo-feudalism over this outright nonsense. Story 94. Fascism is here. There is no more objective truth. They do not even care about destabilizing markets. Apparently that is okay, since egg prices are rising. No tax on tips. Make America great again will make us rich. No. Story 95. We are being held hostage by harmful, misguided groups like the Heritage Foundation, which employ policies such as flood the zone, meaning to put out a large amount of false information to create confusion. They threaten symbolic language and hold deeply conservative views that would reduce us to simple alarm calls for aerial and ground threats like a vervet monkey. That is one of the few things that separates humans from other animals, the ability to trust an utterance to some degree. They strongly oppose this and want it eliminated. Most animals have only inherited calls for simple threats. Birds and some other species produce songs to attract mates, but these are simply communications of fitness and likely serve to mislead other birds. We suffer from a form of Stockholm Syndrome, favoring those who want to be capitalist versions of Pol Pot. They hate anything that is not obedience or correct response to commands. While they cannot fully achieve this control, they aim to with artificial intelligence and robots. We might need to isolate ourselves, similar to Cambodia, especially if we continue following individuals like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, who lack expertise in fields like music production. However, I do not believe it will come to that extent. Story 96. We live in a plutocracy with billionaire feudal systems taking shape. Feudal systems with artificial intelligence-assisted overlords, no less. It is unclear if there will be an economy in 6 years. Donald Trump and his misleading attention grabs have largely faded into the background. Story 97. It is everything you would expect from Donald Trump, and it is why many people think his supporters oppose democracy. They have no understanding of real American values. They represent the real problem in the United States. Donald Trump is just a symptom of a larger issue. Most Americans prefer to hate rather than engage in critical thinking. We are a nation in decline. Story 98. Donald Trump is a controversial figure, but there are people who strongly support him regardless of his actions. Story 99. Federal employees take a sacred oath to uphold the Constitution. No federal employee takes an oath to uphold Donald Trump's feelings. Story 100. As ridiculous as it is, and as many things are, we are definitely getting what we deserve. Most would disagree, but they are not true critical thinkers. Story 101. After he installs someone who is a supporter of Donald Trump, we will not be able to trust any of the statistics coming from the federal government as long as Donald Trump and his associates remain in power. Story 102. Other agencies rely on this data, and skewing the numbers will negatively impact Americans by affecting how funding is allocated. This data is meant to guide decisions, set interest rates, evaluate programs, forecast trends, and more. It also impacts how other countries invest in the United States. If they see that our numbers are not reliable, it affects investments. Story 103. Unless there was serious misconduct involved, this feels suspicious. The Bureau of Labor Statistics plays a crucial role in providing objective economic data, and interfering with independent institutions for political reasons is a bad sign. At the very least, there should be a clear explanation. Otherwise, it just fuels distrust. Story 104. Who cares? Where are the Trumpstein files? Why are Republicans being allowed to cover up pedophilia? Why aren't we holding pedophiles in politics accountable? Who cares about Donald Trump's poor job numbers leading to the dismissal of the truthful person? Allegations against Donald J. Trump should be addressed seriously and respectfully. Story 105. It will be many years until economists or market watchers trust America's labor statistics again. Story 106. It is shooting the messenger, which is bad enough, but worse, it will be deeply destabilizing. American prosperity is built on transparency and accurate data. Too many of our citizens take these for granted, and without them, we will quickly spiral into unstable territory. Story 107. My first thought is how I can get a high-paying government job by counting, or more accurately, having others count for me. Story 108. It is absolute nonsense, and I hope she takes legal action to keep her job. Donald Trump has no clothes, no integrity, and no honor. He is undeserving of the office of president, and how he has any political or personal support is beyond me. Story 109. Having worked in a department of statisticians, I find it both hilarious and revolting. The absolutely boring and thorough routine they go through, and then their manager is supposed to have manipulated the numbers and nobody else would notice or leak it. It just shows how pathetic and dishonorable Donald Trump and his clan are. It reminds me of when Republicans were screeching about librarians pushing banned books. Story 110. Just another reason to not trust the government under President T. It is stomach-churning to see the removal of smart, competent, impartial government workers replaced by yes men. Story 111. This administration is the worst group of felonious, hypocritical traitors in at least the last 100 years. Anyone who supports or facilitates them is just as guilty and awful. Story 112. There are 3 types of lies. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. Mark Twain. This is why he is correct. Statistics, when done in bad faith, are easy to manipulate for one purpose or another through changing the comparisons and measurements. These statistics are now in the hands of someone who will be more than happy to bend them to meet whatever narrative is needed, up to the point of outright lying with them. Story 113. It is too soon to know if it was justified. Unfortunately, Democrats have claimed persecution when Donald Trump has taken actions, and then video proof of guilt emerged showing they were guilty of the accusations. Therefore, we cannot accept condemnation from the left as proof of innocence. There are arguments on both sides. Liberals have a long history of manipulating data for political purposes, going back at least 50 years, and Donald Trump has a well-known history of dishonesty. Without a neutral and qualified third party evaluating this specific case, any claims of guilt or innocence are irresponsible. We must wait for the facts to emerge. Story 114. The next chief will also end up fired because it is not legally or mathematically possible to falsify the numbers the way former President Trump wants. The loss of other staff will create incomplete data, and they may stop releasing data next year until Congress intervenes when the cost of living adjustment schedule is broken. Private companies will expand their data collection. Automatic data processing will increase profits. The market will be more volatile while insiders make money and outsiders are less informed. Palantir Technologies will start engaging in market analysis. This represents another headwind for the economy and democracy. Story 115. As we are now governed under a technocratic authoritarian dictatorship, I would be shocked if anyone not taking a knee were to remain. Story 116. I think it is classic petty, selfish behavior on the part of Donald Trump. He can only throw temper tantrums. He is not at all presidential or professional. He needs to be impeached. Story 117. We can no longer trust any facts coming from the White House. This will result in sane people not supporting the Make America Great Again movement, totally giving up on the government, meaning even fewer will vote in the future. Not that voting will mean anything under this regime. Donald Trump has to approve the voting machines, and you know what that means. The great experiment is over. Unless revolution happens, our country is finished as a republic and you can forget about democracy. Story 118. It's a classic fascist technique. If they don't like the statistics, they remove whoever is accurately reporting them and replace them with a sycophant. A big part of how fascist regimes collapse is not just that they are unpopular or that internal and external forces remove them. It is also because they employ bootlickers instead of professionals. To stay in power, they need yes men. But yes men, more often than not, are ineffective at actually doing the jobs they have been given. As a result, the systems break down from mismanagement. Story 119. The Daily had a good analogy about when Argentina dismissed their finance ministers for reporting unfavorable numbers. Going forward, nobody believed them, which caused capital markets to increase their cost of borrowing and led to an economic crisis. Story 120. I was worried about riots, martial law, and possibly World War III, but then realized it did not affect anyone who did not get fired and went to work. Story 121. He is going to manipulate the numbers like the Chinese Communist Party. Donald Trump is acting like the countries he does not actually hate but envies instead: North Korea, China, Cuba, and Russia. Story 122. Beyond any of the other responses people post here that I might agree with, one of my duties at my job is to occasionally fill out government surveys from organizations like the United States Census Bureau or the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They let you know that these surveys are mandatory. The surveys are also a pain because they tend to ask for information that is not easy to obtain. What was your annual expenditure on office supplies last year? Is not a bad question, but what was your annual expenditure on paper office supplies last year? Is a ludicrous question. For questions like this, you are likely to respond with not applicable or a made-up answer. This is especially annoying because the purpose of the survey is not for a specific audit, but rather to aggregate your information with all of the other companies in the United States to produce reports like, trends show that United States companies in the manufacturing sector are consuming 5% less paper products than in the previous year. Which brings me to the point of this question. Why jump through all these hoops filling out these tedious forms when you know the government bodies taking the information are going to lie about the results anyway? Story 123. If you are responsible for delivering numbers and return a month later to say, the numbers we delivered last month were off by 750 to 1000%, then I understand your supervisor might doubt your understanding of the subject matter or processes enough to manage the department delivering those numbers. People often miss the point. Revisions are acceptable, including downward revisions. There is uncertainty, but part of the job is understanding the limits of that uncertainty so that initial numbers are close enough to be useful. However, if you are an inventory manager and order 7 times more stock than needed, or an engineer who designs a system that can only handle 1/7 of the expected load, you would likely be fired. Therefore, it follows that if you are in charge of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the labor statistics are wrong by a factor of 7, your position may not last long. Story 124. Well, confidence and trust, which are signs of a stable economy, are gone. But I guess this is what people voted for, to be led by the same person responsible for the deaths of millions because his ego did not allow him to trust the science behind a vaccine. Story 125. Trump apologists will look back and point to the inaccuracy of the data and argue it was a competency issue. Those who are not brainwashed will remember it was because the numbers were alleged to be fabricated despite there being no evidence to justify that accusation. Story 126. Why do we have these questions every single day? Americans of Reddit, Your historically unpopular president did something incredibly stupid and likely illegal. How do you feel about it? We feel bad about it. What else do you want us to say? Story 127. Worried but not panicked. I don't like it. It feels authoritarian, but it really depends on who gets placed there. I will panic if it is a political lackey, but not if it is a career bureaucrat. Story 128. Since the Trump administration is all agreement, it makes sense to add another reason. Will Americans see through this and everything else? I hope so. Story 129. I am so tired of no consequences for the actions the Republican Party and this administration are taking. There was no reason to fire that woman. Story 130. The firing in particular is not a topic I would put in my top 10 concerns. However, the findings of the report are, and Donald Trump attempting to cover it up is also concerning. That being said, I am worried about many things at this point, to the extent that it feels overwhelming, and I cannot provide a comprehensive list of what is troubling me right now. For example, the Palestine genocide and Israel's influence on American domestic policy is my #1 concern. Additionally, we have immigration and customs enforcement, the consequences of the Affordable Care Act, the dismantling of democracy and the government, the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the rise of fascism, all of which are significant concerns on my radar. Story 131. It makes me think of that scene in Macbeth where the murderous Mad King scolds a messenger for bringing bad news. Story 132. I think that was the realization for me that America is no longer a democratic republic. It is an oligarchy with an authoritarian head. Story 133. It is not a surprise in the slightest. His goal is to run the market as hot as possible for 4 years, and he is aiming to control every lever that can impact it. I believe his objective is to bluff the rest of the world into investing heavily in the United States to the point where there are enough jobs that this particular event ends up being meaningless. For example, if he manipulates the numbers to show an extra 500,000 jobs are created this year when we actually lost 100,000, then we would call that bad. If at the end of 4 years he is able to attract enough investment and development that the net result is in reality plus 1 million jobs, then no one cares as things will get averaged out across his term. The man is a deceiver, and they are going all in on their flood the zone strategy. We will see where he lands. Honestly, this particular event is nowhere near as bad as the damage he did to the medical research industry. Story 134. I am answering this because I think I should give some context. I am 37, married black male with 2 kids, ages 2 and 1. I own a house in Philadelphia and work a white-collar job. Basically, I am a typical voter whose lifestyle probably overlaps with most Americans chasing the American dream. The short answer is I do not care. I only hear about it when it crosses into my non-political areas of Reddit. I think there is truly a loud minority trying to get us to care about these things, but when you look at a typical day with having to get my kids to daycare, working, spending time with friends, and getting some time with my wife, we do not stress over the constant political yelling happening every day. This is obviously not the typical answer you get from Reddit. But remember, when you ask Reddit questions, you are asking a specific demographic of people, and it is not truly representative of the diversity of the United States. Story 135. It totally makes sense to fire someone who was doing the job Congress told them needed to be done. Pulling their funding and then complaining that they are not getting accurate data is just a problem. Story 136. It is the most pathetic display of Donald Trump's utter failure as a leader to date. How anyone could possibly respect someone so irredeemably weak as Donald Trump boggles the mind. Story 137. Joseph Stalin took similar actions but had his labor statistics chief executed. Donald Trump is the closest contemporary comparison. Story 138. People will hopefully get fed up enough to elect another president who corrects all of these awful policies. Story 139. But actually, he thought as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures, it was not even forgery. It was merely the substitution of one piece of nonsense for another. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. Statistics were just as much a fantasy in their original version as in their corrected version. A great deal of the time you were expected to make them up out of your head. For example, the Ministry of Plenty's forecast had estimated the output of boots for the quarter at 145 million pairs. The actual output was given as 62 million. Winston, however, in rewriting the forecast, marked the figure down to 57 million, so as to allow for the usual claim that the quota had been overfulfilled. In any case, 62 million was no nearer the truth than 57 million, or than 145 million. Very likely no boots had been produced at all. More likely still, nobody knew how many had been produced, much less cared. All one knew was that every quarter astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot. And so it was with every class of recorded fact, great or small. Everything faded away into a shadow world in which, finally, even the date of the year had become uncertain. Story 140. Trump's response to bad news is to suppress the news. As an entitled wealthy individual, he wants constant praise, and if he is ever held accountable for the resulting poor decisions, he will blame his supporters for providing him with inaccurate information. Story 141. Makes me feel like there are other fraudulent numbers because people are afraid of making Donald Trump look bad. Story 142. The usual critics will still blame the Democratic Party when the bill comes due. Nothing a conservative dislikes more than managing the country's finances responsibly. Story 143. He did not receive the propaganda memo and reported facts. No wonder he was fired. We no longer believe in facts, science, or laws in the United States. Instead, we focus on hurting someone else so we can feel better that it was not us who got hurt this time. Story 144. While we constantly talk about him being a big baby, a bully, and firing her because he did not like the numbers, these are symptoms. The disease, the real issue, is his control of information. He is going to put a person in who alters the information in his favor going forward. Story 145. Firing people who are seen as disloyal to Donald Trump is now the norm. Even simple facts are refuted to please Donald Trump. The new coronavirus disease 2019 page is a disaster. Story 146. We can expect the next job report to say that 10 trillion new jobs were added or whatever made-up number the former president demands. Story 147. This will shatter the faith of businesses that make financial decisions based on realistic data. Businesses hate uncertainty and questionable input. Decisions to expand or move forward will be delayed. Welcome to the next phase of the economic recession. Story 148. I am ready for a night of the long knives at this point. These lackeys are out of control. They will do anything to keep their heads down and maintain the best job they have ever had. There is not an ounce of backbone in any of them. The entire party is a kabuki dance. Story 149. It is incredibly frustrating. We are in a very difficult time. It is astounding to see in real time our republic slide so easily into authoritarianism. Understanding it is because people voted for unqualified leaders. These leaders got their due to the weakness of the older leadership in the opposition and their unwillingness to let go of power or address corruption. The entire executive branch is incompetent, and the other two branches are just giving in without any resistance. The Republicans in Congress have surrendered. The previous administration's cabinet was full of people who did not understand how government works or how to get things done. They ignored facts and information from professionals and operated based on intuition. They have weaponized ignorance and incompetence. The Nazis were, in reality, unqualified. They did not understand how a country functions or the logistics needed to support Hitler's goals. Their regime depended on the credit built up in the previous 50 years. It was not until the Russians were shelling Berlin that the country realized how misguided they were. Now the United States is experiencing a similar situation. Who will step up and pull us back from the abyss? Will anyone? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.